All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. If you go back to some of your preseason, I don't know if they were prognostications or just a season preview, would you recall possibly what you said or wrote at the time about the potential impact of the Reds maybe having to play the first month or month plus of the season without Tyler Stephenson? Before you even answer, I'm going to assume that was probably a bit of a concern for you and most of Reds country at the time. Do you recall any of those thoughts you may have had back in March?
I probably wrote something like or said something like he was the hardest to replace guy on the Reds, and the Reds would have a hard time specifically against lefties, but in general without Tyler Stephenson. Am I along the right lines?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have a specific. I didn't take the
Oh,
time to go back and pull it up, but I wanted to get a sense of your mind frame, your mindset at the time back in spring training when you hear oblique for one of the Reds' top returning players playing one of the most key positions. You know, QB1 is Tyler Stephenson of the Reds found out towards the end of spring this season filled with so much promise and expectation was potentially going to start for a good while without Stevenson. What was the tone and the message at the time, I guess, that was delivered?
well, it was better than it would have been at the start of spring training because what the Reds did at least know by the middle of March was what they had in Jose Trevino.
Mhm.
Extension thoughts were already percolating with the Reds around their number 2 catcher, who then became their number 1 catcher. But if you would have told them at the start of spring training that they wouldn't have Stevenson, who was as consistent as any Reds hitter was in 2024, that would be a massive alarm bell, fire siren, and it still was to an extent a lot of that initially when the injury happened. I did a lot of digging too in the Reds clubhouse this week. And asked a lot of guys like, what's the difference between having 1 catcher and having 2? And you know what I mean by that. Every team has 2 catchers. The Reds have 3 catchers right now. But having 2 starting catchers who can pick up a team, who can carry a team. The biggest thing I heard, and Terry Francona echoed this as well, was when you don't, you have a lot of pitchers going into the manager's office saying, I need to throw to this guy. And it creates rocky relationships. It creates playing favorites with specific pitchers. It has a pretty big ripple effect. And also then when one of those catchers gets hurt, you're sunk. Well, the Reds weren't sunk without Stevenson. Now they have multiple guys they really trust at the catcher position. And as Stevenson showed on Sunday, having that bat really makes a big difference.
We're going to continue that conversation, but of course, this is time for your favorite part of the show. This is the dramatic tease for Power Stacks. As we start with this, coming up on the show today, 15 years after his big league debut, why the name Aroldis Chapman has come up in the Reds clubhouse again. Also, chicks dig the long ball, but the Reds don't necessarily have to have him. At least that's what TJ Friedl thinks. We've got a conversation with the Reds leadoff man on the way. And also why the Stanley Cup playoffs have been a big talker in the Reds clubhouse, and not just a talker, a trash talker over the Stanley Cup playoffs. Those stories are on the way as we say welcome into Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith, proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. Chaz, that conversation about catchers is such a fascinating one, so let's go over some more of the facts. As Tyler Stephenson returned for the first time this season, 5 weeks in, and started his season in the Reds series against the Nats, the Reds covered the time without Stevenson with a winning record, had a pitching staff, starters and relievers, that by most major metrics has been one of the best staffs as a whole in the National League. And they did that throwing to 2 catchers that they had either very little experience with in Austin Wynns or no experience with in Jose Trevino outside of spring training. And obviously those 2 catchers have hit well, both over 300. They've driven in runs. They've gotten on base. They've played excellent defense. So as we talk about the return of Tyler Stephenson and how important he is to this team, let the record also show that this is the Power Stacks Appreciation Podcast for the work done the first 5 weeks of the season by Austin Wynns and Jose Trevino. What could have been, as you said, an alarm to start the season, could have been a downfall or a gaping hole in this roster, in this team. They not only managed, they thrived until Stevenson got back.
Yeah, you will hear a different part of my conversation with Friedl in a bit, but something that Friedl said as well when he was talking about the depth in the lineup, and he said, "Man, we've got the best hitting catchers in baseball." And of course, the expectation is if you play it over 162 games, Jose Trevino and Austin Wynns might not be the best hitting catchers in all of MLB. You put Tyler Stephenson into that group, and you see the progress that you're seeing from Jose Trevino as a hitter, and certainly you have a group that is more than pulling its weight offensively. And this is my favorite stat, but I forget what the number is. The Reds' record in games that Luke Mey started last year was it like 10-30? It wasn't that bad. It was pretty much like 10-30. And again, I don't have the number, but the Reds were bad when Luke Mey started last year, and it's nothing against Luke, but it shows when you have a quality number 2 catcher, the impact that makes on the lineup. And so, like, as much as we like Austin Wynns on this podcast, he wasn't going to sustain this offensive pace. To have 2 guys who you can win with on any day, who you can throw with any pitcher, who can make a real impact on both sides of the ball. We can talk more big picture about the Red season, but if you do want to put on the glass half full kind of glasses, it's all right. Now the Reds have their real catching tandem back, and Francona, the front office, really truly does believe that having that is a critical swing piece for the entire team, much beyond kind of their own individual production.
You're right, but how many seasons, and going to what you're talking about now, how many seasons have the Reds been searching for the second catcher that could add more than just rest to Tyler Stephenson, or even going back to Tucker Barnhart for a few years ago to find somebody that was capable? And clearly they identified Jose Trevino. They committed to Jose Trevino, and Jose Trevino's made that pay off early in the season, and good for Austin Wynns. You know, all you can do is take your opportunity that's given, and given this opportunity, he's excelled in that time to the point that when Stephenson comes back, there was also, I mean, there are other factors certainly that we're going to talk about, but Reds have 3 catchers right now. There was a time we didn't know that they would have 3 catchers when it was time for Tyler Stephenson to come back, but Terry Francona is realistic and was very open, even with us, as I'm certain he was with Austin Wynns, that this is not a forever situation. That timeline is to be determined, but certainly you expect it's probably not going to be too much longer.
Austin Hayes could return as soon as Friday. Between now and Friday, the Reds are going to be facing a lot of left-handed starters, or really between, was it Friday, last Friday, and when Stephenson was activated, and next Friday when Hayes returns. It's a lot of lefties. They faced 2 lefties over the weekend. So,
Yep.
You could call up, Will Benson, but Will Benson probably doesn't have a role to start when you're facing left-handed pitching. It's been, Rhys Hines is right-handed, but it's been up and down for him. Jacob Hurtubise left-handed. So if you're looking for a right-handed bat, and the weakest spot in your depth chart in terms of guys who can play a specific position is your lack of options at first base. Austin Wynns can at least cover first base if you're in an absolute pinch. That plus, he was swinging the bat from the right side better than they expected and better what the rest of their options were. So that gave him some extra time on the roster. And again, it's a good problem to have when you have a third catcher who does belong on a big league roster around the league.
All right, catching 3 catchers aside, when Stephenson was ready, unfortunately, Austin Hayes needed another injured list stint, and Francona pointed out right away, what's easy to see what you're talking about is Hayes was so key to this lineup when he came back, and he was so big to have that right-handed bat against left-handed pitching to seemingly, at least in the short term, replace him with Tyler Stephenson's work. They're going to see Chris Sale in Atlanta on this road trip that we'll talk about later in the show. So there's that. But if Hayes comes back, as you said, and he's eligible soon, and you get Hayes and Stephenson back, then you start to look at this team as being more whole, at least the way it was designed, the lineup early in the season, and that has to excite this team now that they've gotten through this period, at least with their heads above water, above 500.
2 not flaws, but kind of flaws in this lineup is, one, they haven't had enough guys who are very calm at the plate. They step up, they're in the rhythm of the game, and then bang, they can come up with that big swing. And that's to a T, Austin Hayes and Tyler Stephenson, 2 guys who we haven't seen in the lineup at the same time yet. All right, it's also a lineup that hasn't had enough power, enough guys who are ready to pounce on their pitch early in a count. And that's, been the biggest issue with McLean and with Friedl, and Ellie's having a nice year, but Ellie hasn't done enough of that as well. The Reds would like to see more of that. So that's something that Stephenson helps, something that Hayes will help. Also, like Stephenson came back and was hitting 7th. That's a good sign. Like this lineup isn't banking desperate for Stephenson like it was in 2024. So the offense, I think they got like the 12th best OPS in baseball right now. The offense as a whole it's in a fine place. Some guys need to do better. Some other stuff needs to improve. Stevenson's throwing from Saturday needed to improve. But he is a track record of being a fine receiver and a fine thrower. But all that is kind of some stuff to clean up for the Reds to take the next step.
All right, let's get to the guys in the clubhouse because there's some good conversation to be had here that we would like to share from the clubhouse over the last several days. And as we talk about the lineup, the Reds' main leadoff hitter, the guy that Terry Francona said from the start, I want him to be my leadoff guy. I want him to get on base a couple of times a game. TJ Friedl is top 10 in baseball in hits from the leadoff spot. So certainly there are things that could happen that haven't happened for TJ Friedl. He hasn't had an explosive start to the year, but I think that's been a solid start for Friedl in this role with this lineup, that he's had a good season so far. You talked to Friedl this week, and you and I both looked at each other and went, no, we haven't really talked to TJ Friedl as much as you would think you would be drawn to a TJ Friedl in a clubhouse, because there have been a lot of other stories and personalities and things to talk about. You circled back to one of the good ones in TJ Friedl. What did you find out from him this week?
Looking at his season, what I wrote about him on Sunday was he's been more pesky than powerful. And there's definitely a place for Friedl to drive the ball, to really pull with that upward flight path, like we've seen from him down the line when he's really at his most explosive. But he's putting the ball in play. He's using the whole field. And while you can quibble, criticize, he's not been, he's been better than what we're seeing from him now. Terry Francona is extremely pleased with what he's seeing from a consistency and, again, a peskiness perspective. And so I was talking to Friedl about his approach, about the lineup, about how the identity of the offense has changed. Friedl really latched onto the word identity. That was something he wanted to talk about. Friedl talked about how some of the identity and some of the philosophy of this lineup this year has evolved with the new staff.
Just continue where we're at. I think, for us and our core and our identity, right? Like that's who we are. And I think we've been playing that brand of baseball after that first week. I think it's kind of getting going at first, and then once we hit our stride, we kind of figured out, like, okay, this is us, this is who we are. Everyone knows who they are, and it's just playing to themselves for the team. So I feel like we just continue what we do, continue our brand of baseball. And we've had some games where we cut up 6-7 runs without home runs. Mm-hmm. You don't need home runs to win games, which sometimes I feel like last year we were counting on a home run. We were banking on a 3-run home run, grand slam, stuff like that. What this year just feels a little bit different in the sense of, like, hey, let's just create traffic. Let's keep guys on base, get them over, play baseball, manufacture runs, and see where we're at. Oh, win like 7-1. I think Friday, the first game here, we scored 6 or 7 runs. I guess that was, yeah. And didn't have a home run, right? Like, we don't need home runs to put up 6-7 runs a game. Just get guys on base, play the game of baseball, and let the rest take care of itself.
That kind of explains how they're approaching a lot of these at-bats. Like, we have seen Ellie sell out for more power at different points of his career, and he'll be fine. He'll hit for more power. But he's not hitting for as much power yet. That's what this offense is trying to be. Also, like, look at a Gavin Lux, who fits the professionalism from a quality of an at-bat standpoint to a T. Austin Hayes, that's who he's been when he's healthy. Like, that's what they're trying to be. That's what this new hitting staff is trying to shape and gear them toward.
I talked to Chris Valleca recently, and one of the first things he said when he was hired was, I look forward to establishing, there's that word, an identity with this team offensively and continuing to work on that. He's an interesting dude. I mean, obviously, I knew him back when he played with the Reds back in the day, and him in that position on this staff, certainly everybody seems to have responded well, but identity goes back to, I think, what he's feeding this lineup when he works with these guys every day. So it'll be interesting to continue to talk about that. But good to hear from Friedl. Glad he's healthy. Glad he's been checking the boxes that he needs to check from the leadoff spot so far. And I think he's right about the way this team offensively is built and has played. We're going to get into some things that we would put into Tito's top 2 right now. And I'll start with this, and let me hide the ball a little bit. If I gave you the date August 31st, 2010, you could go back to a lot of things, but we're talking about August 31st, 2010. That date in Reds history was the debut of Aroldis Chapman, which was
I was at that game.
I was at that game as well. It's a fascinating chapter in Reds history because for this era, in this moment in time in Reds franchise history, the Reds had this thing that you had to see, that was must see. If you knew the Reds were potentially in a position for those doors to open late in a game, once Aroldis Chapman got here, stayed here, and established himself, that was must-see baseball. You had to see it. People gawked at Aroldis Chapman because of what he did with the radar gun, how he carried himself, kind of the mystery that he was, because we didn't hear from him a ton. Back then, teams weren't even required to have a designated translator for players who didn't speak English as well and didn't deal with the media a lot. So there was always this aura about Aroldis Chapman and this air of who is this guy and what is this player that's landed from another planet in Cincinnati. I loved that time. But as he made that debut 15 years ago, it caught the attention of everyone in baseball. And as you found out, it also caught the attention of one kid who was probably, 12, 13 years old back when this was happening. It caught the attention of Luis Mey, who arrived in Cincinnati recently. Terry Francona immediately, obviously, was familiar with Mey because it's hard to forget Mey if you've seen him in person and if you've seen him pitch. So you did an incredible piece with Charlie's Chalkboard on Luis Mey. What did you find out about him, and what was the conversation like? What kind of a vibe did you get from him talking to this hard throw-in right-hander that's now arrived in Cincinnati?
So first, you mentioned Francona. Let me tell a Francona story. Tito lives in Arizona. Tito lives in Arizona during the offseason. Popped over to some Arizona Fall League games, which where a lot of top prospects go to kind of polish their games and such. And he saw a game that Luis Mey pitched, and he goes, "Holy smokes!" He said, "That must be the best inning Luis has ever thrown in his life." One, and two, he just blew the doors off of through it. He just bowling balled through a very talented group of players, and that's the type of impression that Luis Mey needs. And that's something the Reds didn't have. Two things. One, and I've spoken about this a lot over the years. The Reds have not done a good enough job of developing relief pitchers. They've done a great job with their rotation. It's been a lot of veterans and older guys or guys they're paying in the bullpen. And two, this was a very loud criticism I heard around the league about the Reds last season, very consistently, was this bullpen didn't have power arms. They could beat you with, Fernando Cruz's splitter when he was hotter. They had some nice changeups, some nice sweepers. But I think the stat was, at this point last year, the Reds had thrown 7 pitches out of their bullpen of 96 miles an hour plus and none harder than 97. This year, they've got like 6 guys who are throwing 96 consistently and one who's throwing 103. So if you want to feel old, this is a guy in Luis Mey who grew up watching Aroldis Chapman, and Chapman's the reason that he's doing this in the first place. I asked Mey about his goals, and then he gets into the big name there and some other big names as well. Here's Mey. You can tell he's a very confident kid.
My long-term goals is be the best closer ever. Be like Mariano Rivera is one of my inspirations besides Chapman. So I would like to be close to him, to his record, or surpass his record.
Did you watch Chapman as a kid?
Yeah, Chapman is the main character on my goal. I saw this guy reaching balls at 105. I didn't know. I was asking my dad if that thing was fast. He was like, "Yeah, it's fast. That's the fastest pitch ever. So nobody can hit it." I was like, I want to be like here. And it's like, okay, just try it and let's see what happens. I'm close enough. I think I'm close enough to get there. I will keep pushing till I get there, or get really, really close.
Your dad told you that?
Yeah.
What's his name?
Luis Mey.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Have you ever met him?
Chapman? Nah, I would like to. I really want to meet this guy for sure. Besides Mariano, I met Mariano in the R. So now the only one I'm missing right now is met Aroldis up.
Have you, I don't know, like Freddie Benavidez, Coach Chapman, like, have you talked to any guys who know Chapman from here?
Yeah. Marty Soto.
Yeah.
He have been talking to me a lot of things from him, like how he been through, how like everything what happened to him. So I'm kind of identify myself with him. So I'm just want to be, even with the downfalls and everything, I just want to be the greatest, like same as him.
Do you see any similarities between how you throw?
Yeah,
Mechanic?
the below. Like the below and the, I used to have the kick he had, but now I'm just having the downfall in the back leg. If you pay attention to the back leg, me and him just like separate the same way. Yeah.
So first of all, my favorite part of that interview was him saying to his dad, "Yeah, I'd like to do that. I'd like to throw 105 miles an hour." And his dad goes, "Sure, kid." Second, just you can hear it, and I want to stress this too: the confidence and the poise and the public speaking ability of a kid from the Dominican Republic who's 23 years old. I mean, his maturity and all that has honestly, that's the first thing people talk about when they talk about Luis Mey. It's that side of him as the person that you saw come across and come through with that interview. So that's really impressive. And then, of course, he's got the elite velo to back it up.
Speaking of impressive, though, and the thing that strikes you about Luis Mey is also if you stand next to him at 23 years old, what are the measurements? He's 6'3", 240.
Zach Taylor is looking for guys like Luis Mey. That is a fact.
That's a great way to put it. He is a physical specimen, and even though he's young, he's 23. There's no baby fat there. There's probably not much fat of any kind there. He is rock solid, has the lightning bolt of a right arm, and has the confidence to go with it. I think that's one of my favorite stories I've heard so far this year is that he immediately goes to the Cuban Missile is my guy. And when the Reds had the Cuban Missile, again, that was a great era of Reds baseball that just got it felt like it didn't really ever get to the level that you wanted it to reach with Aroldis Chapman. But man, he's been around for a long time, pitching for 15 years now. It was in Boston now, I think. He's bounced around a little bit, but he's still getting it done and still bringing the heat. But the Reds have something there. It's way early for Luis Mey, but they have something to work with in Luis Mey for sure. And if you didn't see that story on Charlie's chalkboard, check it out. You bring up power arms in the Reds bullpen, and we go from Luis Mey to Graham Ashcraft. And Terry Francona about Ashcraft after he twirled his 3 perfect innings on 31 pitches against St. Louis and was completely dominant early in that series. You know, this was the transition year from the rotation to the bullpen for Graham Ashcraft. And Terry Francona said when he was asked about it, hey, not that he can't start, because that's not off the table, but I think he's in the right spot. I think he may have found a home. Now, on Sunday in the series finale against the Nats, Ashcraft didn't have the dominant appearance that he had against St. Louis, but you can see, and we've always been intrigued by his attributes and his tools and how they might play in the bullpen. Is that starting to build a body of work for you and what we can assess about Ashcraft's effectiveness in this role?
You want to know how to know when you've made it as a reliever? It's when you're at the top of the depth chart, the most high leverage of high leverage, and then you have a bad game, and you have a bad game, and it's not changed whatsoever the confidence or the role projection that you have going forward. And we have reached that point with Graham Ashcraft because he had the bad day on Sunday, and I know that doesn't change for a second what his role is, how people feel about him, the confidence that the Reds have about him in the bullpen. You know, you look at the way the move has let him ratchet his stuff up a notch. The cutter's just got something extra to it. When he's establishing that at the top of the zone and can also throw it at the bottom, but kind of the top of the zone is the harder thing, and then run his slider away at the bottom of the zone. I mean, that's what every team's looking for, and it plays too. I mean, he hit 100 miles an hour. I don't think we give Graham enough recognition for his elite velocity, which he also showed as a starter as well. So put all that together, that's a heck of a reliever. If it's October, and the Reds have a long, long way to go to get there, I could very easily see them build the bullpen game plan around Ashcraft for a critical stretch, Pagan in the ninth, Santillan, bring him in a perfect high leverage fireman situation, I could see May getting like the 6th inning or something. There's a world where May clicks. If he develops that slider, he could enter that mix. And then situationally, you've got your lefties. You kind of feed into that as well. And then you've got, and I'm forgetting guys, but then you've got like Jabot, Barlow, and middle long relief ish, and then Suter in his role as well. So like that is what they're building toward. That vision for the bullpen, maybe throw in prospect Zach Maxwell as well. It's kind of the vision, the dream that they're latching towards, and the dream is built around Ashcraft.
Got some things to work with in the bullpen, no doubt, does Terry Francona and the Reds. All right, imagine, if you will, over the weekend, walking into the Reds clubhouse in the afternoon when players are going through their routine, doing their work, getting ready to go outside for BP, as long as it wasn't raining, which it was pretty much raining most of the time. And you walk in, though, and, typically you see all of the lockers and game jerseys in there for that night. And you walk in on Saturday, and I look in the locker of Taylor Rogers, and there's a Nathan McKinnon Colorado Avalanche jersey in his locker. Emilio Pagan in his locker, there's a Nathan McKinnon Colorado Avalanche jersey. First base coach Colin Cowgill walks by in a Colorado Avalanche hoodie. Well, Saturday was Game 7 of this Western Conference playoff in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And Chaz, just right off the top, where are you on hockey? Other than having a friend and a co-host on your podcast who does hockey, where are you on hockey?
Keep going. That's what I got. No, I got nothing. I got absolutely nothing on hockey.
Okay. So the connection for the Reds, and this is just such a fun story. The connection for the Reds is Spencer Steers from Denver, or makes his offseason home in Denver. We'll say that. Taylor Rogers is from Denver, but Spencer Steers' brother-in-law plays for the Colorado Avalanche. Logan O'Connor, great player in Colorado. So Spence has always had this, certainly a vested family interest in the Avalanche. Taylor Rogers grew up in Denver as a kid, loving some of the great Colorado Avalanche teams that played at the time that he grew up. And so when the team was in Denver at Coors Field playing their series against the Rockies, it happened to time out that for the Stanley Cup playoffs in this massive first-round playoff series that the Avs are having against the Dallas Stars, which most people feel like should have been maybe a conference final matchup instead of a first-round matchup. Those guys had a game, an afternoon game in Colorado that finished early enough that a lot of them got to go to the hockey game that night. So you have this contingent of Avs fans that are Reds players that went to the game, but not everybody's an Avalanche fan. You've got some guys from Texas in the Reds clubhouse. Tony Santillan is from North Texas, and he's a Dallas Stars fan. Jose Trevino is from the state of Texas, played some in the minor leagues in North Texas, is a big Stars fan. And so while all of these people go to the Avs game in Denver, Jose Trevino, I asked him, I said, hey, man, did you go with those guys? Yeah, I went to the game, but I couldn't sit with them. I'm that hardcore of a Dallas Stars fan. He said I had to be with some Stars people. So he went to the game, watched the game with some Stars people. Colorado won Game 6 in Denver. Game 7 was in Dallas on Saturday, and the Stars came out on top. But before that final outcome, before Game 7, I went to some of those guys and just talked about the talk back and forth. And really, this is the thing, these types of things that keep a clubhouse loose. Stuff that's not about baseball, but it's about other sports, whether it's fantasy football, the Derby, whatever. In this case, starting with Taylor Rogers and then going to Jose Trevino, this was the back and forth about the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Santillan and Trevi are Stars guys, right? Texas guys, they like hockey. Has there been some back and forth in here?
There sure has. Yeah. Yeah, there was a group message going around the last game, and we tied it, had some words, right? And then Dallas came back not even a minute later, took the lead again. So then they got their jabs in. But yeah, it's been a fun series, especially with those guys.
What has the back and forth been like? I heard there's a group text, a little bit of smack talk.
There was some talk going on. I'm over there trying to work, do some scout reports at night, and these guys are blowing up my phone. They can't let me watch the game in peace.
How was your experience in Colorado that night?
It was
Pretty good game.
It was a good game. It was a good game for the Avalanche.
Yeah.
The building was jumping a little bit, but not as much as gonna be jumping tonight in Dallas. So see what we got.
And there was
That's
jumping
fun.
in Dallas. Yeah. And the Stars had a miraculous third period comeback. Colorado got out to a 2-0 lead, so it was really a heartbreaker. And just to shorten this story for you, the player that scored a hat trick, all 3 goals in the third period for the Stars, was traded earlier this season by the Avalanche, was a longtime all-star fan favorite in Denver, and he comes back to sting his old team in the postseason like that. So
Sting, is that a hockey?
no,
that a
that's really
hockey
just mine.
specific?
No, that was really
It's
just
nice.
mine.
Nice turn of phrase.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Not quite the wordsmith you are, but every now and then I drop something. Anyway, so Dallas moves on. So Trevino, Santillan are happy. There's a lot of other people with broken hearts, but they'll still be dialed into the Stanley Cup playoffs. And at some point, I'm going to get you to watch a hockey game.
I've been to a hockey game. Yeah, hockey's great.
Okay.
That's all I got.
That's all right. It's fun to see in the Reds clubhouse. I love it. Those guys light up when they talk about other sports. You know that. I mean, they talk about baseball all day. They light up when they talk about other teams and players that they pull for. We've seen it with basketball and fantasy football and those things, so it was fun. The Reds end the homestand, now head out on the road. First stop, the Atlanta Braves. The Braves, a team that got off to the atrocious start to this season, lost their first 7 games. They've been better since then, but still not quite where you would expect the Braves to be. Chaz, you are going to be in Hotlanta for this series. Give me a quick preview for what the Reds are going to see when they get there.
Instead of talking about the Braves, I'm going to say something here. Atlanta's got a bad bullpen. Reds weren't nearly good enough against Washington's bad bullpen. I feel like that's been a theme, kind of that later chunk of games when they've been trailing specifically. Comeback wins or something I'd like to see a little more from this Reds team. So I'd like to see the Reds go out and do a little more damage against Atlanta's bullpen after maybe not doing enough of that to start this season. It really is a vulnerable group. Even Raisel Iglesias, truly one of the best closers of this generation. He's been vulnerable. It's been in flux. They re-signed Craig Kimbrell, who's on a rehab assignment right now, even though he was terrible, and I mean terrible last season because that's where they're at, looking for bullpen reinforcements. I'd like to see the Reds do some damage there.
It is a 4-game series, so there'll be a pretty good representation, I think, of each team. Certainly, obviously, each team's pitching. You know, it's all hands on deck in a 4-game series, so we'll see how it goes. Reds go from Atlanta to Houston before they come back to Great American Ballpark. Chaz, have you shared this with any friends recently?
All of my friends, yeah. I share with people on the street. No, I guess I could do a better job of practicing what I preach, but yes, I will be sharing this with some friends.
Share this with a friend. Power Stacks, find it wherever you find your podcast. Check us out and search it up on YouTube. And please enjoy this show. We'll be back later in the week and do it again. For now, for Chaz, for our producer, Kent, I'm Geese. We'll see you next time.